The planets of Jupiter and Saturn are often considered as being fundamentally at odds with each other. On one hand, Jupiter represents growth, expansion, the broadening of horizons, the possibilities, hope, faith, optimism. On the other hand, Saturn represents restriction, contraction, decay, pessimism sometimes, but also limitations. And you may not think that these two planets necessarily get along with each other, but that is very much not the case. As a matter of fact, they get along quite well with each other. There is a sense of mutual respect. They both represent, on some level, the guru archetype. They embody two very different types of wisdom, but equally valid wisdom nevertheless. And so when these two planets work together, especially in an aspect such as this fire trine that we will be seeing at the end of August, they really have the potential to provide energy which allows us to manifest into reality the higher goals, ideals, hopes, and dreams that we've set for ourselves. And so we're going to be unpacking this and taking a look at just what we can expect with these fire trines, because there's going to be 3 of them. Between now and next July, we are going to be getting 3 fire trines between Saturn and Jupiter. So this is, in some ways, going to mark the beginning of a chapter for us in how we are manifesting into reality the things that we want for ourselves. So with that said, let's jump right into it. Now, before we get into the aspects of the trine itself, it's important to remember the bigger context in which this trine will be occurring. And just 2 weeks before, on August 12th, we had the solar eclipse in Leo. And I would recommend checking out my video specifically on that eclipse. And although that eclipse has already occurred, the nature of eclipses are not discrete transits that come and go. They are more appropriately seen as portals that in some ways provide the flavor for how the next period of time is going to go. And because the solar eclipse occurred in the fixed sign of Leo, the eclipse window, meaning the period of time in which the eclipse could produce effects, is potentially 6 months or longer. And so part of what made that eclipse very unique was that we had Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Venus, and Mercury all within 5 degrees of fire and air signs. These are complementary energies. There was a lot of flowing energy that occurred. And because those aspects were exact on the day of the eclipse, that energy is baked into the eclipse itself. And so in some ways, we can look at the transits that we are going to be seeing over the course of, I would say, the next 6 months as having, to some extent, the flavor of that eclipse. And part of that eclipse was redefining, reimagining, reviewing the things that were important to us, the ways in which we show up in the world, ways in which we may be limiting ourselves. And so for many of us during August, it's been a time of growth. On one hand, it's required many of us to shed parts of our old self because it was a South Node eclipse. And part of South Node eclipses require us to shed outdated energies, including, and with it being in Leo, which is the sign, one of the big signs, like the sign that represents the self, and it being a solar eclipse, which again, the sun in any chart represents the self, there's been a need to shed those old versions in order to accommodate the new energy that's coming in. And so this trine from Jupiter to Saturn is the first of three opportunities that we'll get to get some forward movement in whatever path we have decided to go on. Like, it's where the rubber meets the road, but it's a supportive aspect. So this is an opportunity to actually get some traction, get things going in the direction that we want to go. And it's powerful energy. The last time we had an exact trine between Saturn and Jupiter in a fire sign was actually back in 2027. So it's been about 20 years. So this is not something that comes around all the time. What makes it unique is that fire energy is about passion, it's about drive, it's about, what gets us excited, what gets us going, and so this is pretty unique energy. And again, we're going to be getting three of them over the course of the year. And if we can work with these energies intentionally, there's potential to accomplish quite a bit. Now, it's important to point out, first and foremost, that Saturn has been in Aries for most of this year. So I think it was in January of this year that Saturn left Pisces and entered Aries. Now, it's important to point out that Saturn is debilitated in Aries. And part of the reason why this is the case is that Aries is cardinal fire. So Aries it's the ram. It wants to move fast. It's the speed demon of the zodiac, and it wants to move fast through the world, I think, is a fair way of characterizing the sign of Aries. Saturn is just about the opposite. Saturn is slow. Saturn does not do anything fast. The way Saturn sees it, anything that is rushed through is not worth doing at all. When I think of Saturn, I think of the Ents from Lord of the Rings, where it's like they spend years making a decision. They take a long time to do anything. And I think Treebeard said something like, anything that doesn't take a long time to say isn't worth saying at all. And Saturn doesn't like to be hasty. And it is not a planet that ever wants to rush through things. And so when he is in the sign that represents that, there is a big clash where Saturn is not wanting to move as quickly as Aries is wanting him to move. And that can cause some friction. That does not mean that Saturn is ineffective, because we all need to slow down sometimes. And there's a real virtue in taking the time to do it right. But it can feel sometimes with Saturn as if we are spinning our wheels when it's in Aries. Because if we do try to rush through, even if we don't think that we're rushing, if Saturn thinks we are, we're going to feel obstacles. Now, the trine from Saturn is going to feel, the trine from Jupiter is going to feel like a breath of fresh air. I think for many who have felt a sense of inertia, a sense of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, will likely be, feeling a step up, a sense of encouragement, not just because it's Jupiter, which is a planet of hope, faith, and optimism, but because Jupiter can help us to see the bigger picture, zoom out, get a more panoramic view, perhaps understand why we might need to slow down in certain areas, or what it is that, did we skip something? Do we need to go back in order to clear a roadblock? And we can often find ways in which we can work smarter, not necessarily harder, not necessarily faster, but doing things the right way, but not in a way that's going to excessively take up our energy. So I do think that with this trine from Jupiter, it's going to be very good for Saturn and good for Saturn and Aries in particular. And again, this is going to be part of an ongoing collaboration really between these planets. So these are the dates when the trine is going to be exact. So on August 31st is going to be the first trine at 13 Aries. So for this first trine, Saturn is going to be retrograde and Jupiter will be direct. And then in April, we're going to be having another trine. The second one is going to be at 17 Aries and 17 Leo, with Saturn direct this time and Jupiter retrograde. And then finally in July of next year, it's going to be taking place at the end of Aries and Leo at 27 degrees. And this time, both of them will be direct. So it's going to be covering a lot of real estate in Aries and Leo, which is great. And even for those who have planets that are squaring Leo or Aries, it's still going to be a good energy, right? It's going to be felt most by fire signs in particular, but air, water, earth, if you have anything in the cardinal or fixed signs, you'll be feeling it. And again, we're going to be doing the deep dive into each sign individually. So to go back to Jupiter and Leo, Jupiter has been in Leo since, I want to say, July of this year. And Jupiter in Leo is big, bold energy, right? Jupiter likes to be in Leo because it is, again, a diurnal planet. And the sun rules Leo, and Saturn, Jupiter, and the sun are all part of the diurnal sect, as I said. And, the one thing about Jupiter and Leo is that it can be a little bit over the top. Part of Jupiter's shadow side is excess, whether it's excess, XYZ going to an extreme. But with Saturn and Aries, that can act as a moderating influence. Even though Saturn is not the strongest in Aries, he's still helping to moderate the effect of Jupiter. And that can really help us from going overboard. And I'm not just talking about overindulgence, right? Too much sweets, too much drinking, too much food. It can be overdoing it in any way, like overworking, burnout, being overdramatic, getting overattached to something. And when Mars enters Leo in September, there's a potential for that to be magnified even more so than it is now, because Mars can fuel Jupiter's appetite even more. But we have this, and Saturn is still going to be trining Jupiter and Mars from Aries. It won't be direct, but it's still, there's still a whole sign-based aspect. So I like that Saturn is at least able to see what's going on in Leo and can try to keep both of those planets from going a bit over the top, which is what they have a tendency to do, not just in fire signs, but it's just the nature of both of those planets, especially when they're together. It can just be a bit over the top. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Jupiter, I think, is that because it is considered a benefic planet, traditionally speaking, it's associated with good luck, good fortune. And that's true. And I don't want to I don't want to mischaracterize what Jupiter does, because Jupiter, like Venus, they are benefic planets associated with bringing about not just fortunate outcomes, but also preventing or at least moderating unfortunate outcomes. But quite often there is a misunderstanding about how that actually works. Now, a lot of times, I've heard people being like, I had like Jupiter trine my natal Jupiter and I didn't get anything, or nothing amazing happened. And it's like, that's not quite how Jupiter works. Now, sometimes Jupiter does drop fantastic things onto our lap. It's rare. I think a lot of it comes down to how dignified your Jupiter is in the natal chart, the houses involved, what else was going in the sky, what else was going on in the sky at the time. But normally, that's not how it happens. It would be nice if it did. It would be really nice if, it's like, oh, Jupiter trine Jupiter, I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket and you win the lottery and you're set for life, right? But it's just not how things work, unfortunately. But it does, at the very least, tend to provide opportunities opportunities will be presented, but it's up to us to go after them. It requires some effort to bring that into our reality. But this is the paradox here, because Jupiter is not the planet that is associated with effort, with drive, right? With the things you need to do to bring things into reality, right? Again, sometimes, and I'm not going to knock on the power of positive thinking or manifestation, like the Neville Goddard stuff, because I think that it truly works for some people. And if that works for you, great. For a lot of us, including a lot of us who have actually really tried, it doesn't always work that way. And even a lot of the real like heavy manifestation type schools of thought will still be like, yeah, but there needs to be some sort of effort. You can't just you can't always just bring things to you. It's not always how it works. But with this trine from Saturn, we are getting not only the opportunities that Jupiter is presenting, but we are also getting the structure, discipline, and methodical approach in order to bring those things into reality. And so that is why these trines are very, very auspicious, because you have both pieces of the puzzle that you need to unlock the door. And of course, and this is going to be more so for people that, maybe you've struggled to either spot opportunities or inhibited in some way from going after what you want to. Here with the trine from between Saturn and Jupiter, there are roadblocks that are being cleared. So it's going to facilitate your ability to go after those things in a way that it really, we haven't seen in a while. These aren't super rare aspects, but again, it's been about 20 years in a fire trine, especially because fire trine is our drive. It is our passion. It is the things, the fire element represents our drive, our passion, what we're excited about. So here, this is like a lot of momentum. The fire is being lit. We're coming off of this month with a lot of things that happened with outer planets that have hopefully for most of us given us some inspiration, different ways of seeing things, and a renewed sense of what's important. So what we are seeing here is the creation of an environment that facilitates both incoming opportunities to manifest the things that we want and the capacity to actually do it. So to have both of those, that's significant, I would say. Now, there is one wild card that I would be remiss if I did not bring up, and that is Mars. So with this first trine that we are going to be getting, and this will not be true for the other two trines, but with this first trine, there is a third party involved here, and that is Mars. Now, Mars is in Cancer, and Mars is also debilitated in Cancer. So we've got debilitated Saturn in Aries and debilitated Mars in Cancer. So Mars is not happy. He can just be very grumpy, I want to say. That it's not his favorite place to be. And there can be a potential for discouragement. And I'm going to get more into this in the individual sign forecasts because it has a potential of playing out very differently depending on which houses it is. Mars is in Saturn and Jupiter. The setup here is that we have a square from Saturn to Mars and then the trine from Saturn to Jupiter. Now, that means that Saturn is speaking with both Mars and Jupiter, but Mars and Jupiter are not talking to each other because they're a neighboring sign, so we consider them as being as in aversion. And that just means that there's a disconnect for right now between those two planets and their energies. But in less than a month from this trine, Mars will be entering Leo. We'll be meeting up with Jupiter, and both of them are going to be spending quite some time in Leo because they're both going to be having retrograde cycles in that sign. But I think as a general rule, we can say that there may be some resistance depending on the houses involved. There may be some pushback to what we're trying to do, and that's because of this tense aspect between the malefics, Saturn and Mars, where there is some sort of, Mars is still wanting to, remember Mars rules Aries, right? So Saturn is in Mars's sign, and Mars is probably feeling really frustrated. And Mars is going to be wanting to push forward in something, but Saturn is saying no. But if you find yourself in that gridlock, zooming out will likely be very beneficial. And that is because of the trine from Jupiter. But it has to come through Jupiter. So the trick is going to be avoiding the urge to push through, rush through something if you can avoid it, right? If you can't avoid it, you can't avoid it. But if you can take your time and zoom out, that will be the way to most successfully navigate these energies. But all in all, I think it's going to be great. And again, this square from Mars is not going to be a feature of this entire cycle of trines between Saturn and Jupiter. It's just going to be some initial friction that we feel right off the bat. But I think it's about being mindful and working intentionally and not letting any sense of inadequacy or any sense of impatience, being patient with ourselves, being patient with others, and being curious is going to go a long way in navigating these energies, and not just navigating them, but getting the most out of them, because that's what we want ultimately. I think that it's not just about surviving, it's about taking it by the reins, right? Crafting our own story in the way that we want to do it, in the way that is sustainable, in a way that is durable. So with that said, let's get into the all signs forecast. Feel free to jump through to your rising sign. And if you don't know your rising sign, you can check out your sun sign placement. You could also even check out your moon placement, but I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. That sort of support really helps the channel, and we will catch you on the next video. Take care. Aries. So Aries and, oops, not Taurus. Okay, so for Aries rising and Aries, so during most of 2026, Saturn has been transiting your first house. And the first house is all about the self, the ways we relate to ourselves. It's what I consider to be, in Hellenistic astrology, it's sort of considered as the helm of the ship that we're steering. And a lot of times when planets transit the first house, it's often seen as being difficult because quite often we can really personally feel the effects of the transits, and it shines a spotlight on ourselves in a way that maybe it hadn't been before. What I like about first house transits is that because this is really considered like the front office of your chart, this is where the executive decisions are being made. We have a higher level of control over the transits when they happen or when our first house is being activated. So generally speaking, when we get a transit either through the first house or to a planet that we have in the first house or both, circumstances arise where we have some agency, we have some control over how things go. So this is not a house where things happen to us. It is a house where circumstances occur, and then we are given options, and it's up to us. But with that does come responsibility, and the choices that we make from those transits can be quite impactful. Now, everybody talks about the Saturn return as, being the closing of one cycle and the starting of a new one. But wherever Saturn is in anybody's chart, it is restructuring that area of our life to set us up for further growth as we progress through each of the 12 houses of the zodiac. And so here, the restructuring that is going on here is all about it has everything to do with the self, how we relate to ourselves. the things again that are important, and how, how we make decisions, what factors we take into account. And Saturn can feel tough, that's it's now retrograde, and Saturn retrogrades are all about karmic rebalancing. It's about it, it can feel like you're under the thumb. It can feel like, again, especially for Aries risings, as if sometimes you're spinning your wheels. You're not getting to where you need to go quick enough, or you've got to take a detour. But keep in mind that if this is occurring, and again, this is going to be occurring, the level of intensity or frequency is going to depend to some extent on whether or not you've got planets in Aries or not, or you've got planets that are squaring Aries, or you've got placements in Libra. But with this trine from Jupiter, it's happening in the fifth house, which is a house. It's a good house. It's a house of good fortune. It's a house of creativity, pleasure, romance, children, because children are a creation, right? Procreation. It's the house of risk taking. It's the house of bold action, which is something that Aries is known for doing. And so I really like to see this trine from Jupiter. And this will, if this year has been a challenge, then this may be a time where you feel like you have a little bit of a break, not just because Saturn is already kind of well into the retrograde, but there's a sense of hope and optimism that is being infused into the experiences that we've been having with Saturn in this house. And we're starting to be a little bit more optimistic. It most likely is going to be a sense that tides are turning in some way, right? It's going to be very unique for each Aries rising. Now, paradoxically, it's kind of funny because, with Jupiter in the fifth house, which I said before is a house of taking risks sometimes, you may actually feel less inclined to be risky, even for an Aries. And that's just because Saturn is in your first house, and it's prompting you to be a little bit more sober. And I don't mean that literally. I mean a little bit more measured, a little bit more calculated before taking risks. But calculated risks, I feel like, could pay off for you, Aries, in this energy. But it has to, any risk that is taken has to honor the way Saturn wants to do it. So this is about really thinking things through before considering a major investment. Now, you've got Mars, which is your chart ruler, in the fourth house of Cancer, and it is squaring Saturn. Now, this square does have reception, meaning because Saturn is a guest in Mars' house, it's going to play a little bit nicer. Also, Saturn's going to play a bit nicer with Mars than he normally would, because, Saturn is right now a guest in Mars' house. This does not mean it's going to be all chummy between these two planets, especially because they're both kind of grumpy. Saturn is fallen in Aries and Mars is fallen in Cancer. Now, even though Mars is your chart ruler and Aries is a martial sign, we always have to be careful with Mars going through the fourth house. The fourth house is the very root of the chart, and it represents, our family, upbringing, our home itself, also parents, theoretically anybody that we cohabitate with is going to be a fourth house topic. So we just want to be really careful about disputes, about conflicts. Those things can come up during this time. But if you at all can, at least through the month of September, try to get out, try to, getting out, recreation. This is a house of recreation, pleasure. You're likely to feel a need to be out of the house more maybe than usual. I would say not a great time for major transactions with home, whether it be, loans or buying a house. If it's something that's been in the works for a while and it's been something that's, been, again, you've paid the tribute to Saturn, so to speak, by doing your due diligence and making sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, then there may not be any issues here. But remember that Mars is still going to Mars, no matter whether, regardless of whether he is your chart ruler or the ruler of Aries. But really, this is, there's a lot of potential here, and this is going to be true between now and the next year as we get these successive trines between Saturn and Jupiter. This is a time to really explore your creative self-expression, right? Because that is what the fifth house is about. And the first house is also about self-expression. So you may be finding that you want to expand your horizon in some way, whether it's like, oh, I'm spending too much time at home. I want to go, I'm going to get out there, maybe take an art class, or I don't know, go skydiving. Doing something, I think that'll be really beneficial in helping to offset any challenges, that's going on in the fourth house with Mars being here. Now, I did forget to mention that with Mars being in the water sign of Cancer, and just with Mars being in the fourth house, there can always be things that come up, whether it be water issues, plumbing. I know that there's been some really severe weather across parts of the US and actually all over the world. So you just want to be really careful with that. And whatever you can do to help prevent those sorts of things. Granted, we don't have Uranus. Uranus is not in your fourth house. So hopefully that will moderate it somewhat. For those of you who are in, married or in committed relationships, this could also just be, we need to get out of the house more. We need to go on more dates, maybe if things have somehow gotten to a point where it's a little bit too monotonous or repetitive, like, hey, let's go to dinner tonight, or let's, go on an adventure together. I think that will really help in terms of any roadblocks that have come up just in terms of the relationship. And sometimes it takes sort of rediscovering those exciting experiences that you have with your significant other if things have gotten to a point where it's just become a bit too monotonous, because Aries doesn't love monotony. It's just really, it can get old fast, right? For those of you who are single, this is definitely a time where you may be reevaluating your standards, right? With Saturn going through your first, you have likely gone through a review and a restructuring of what's important to you in some way. And that you might find that is being reflected in your dating life, because this is a house of dating. This isn't significant relationships, but dating. And you may just decide that you don't even want to date right now. But either way, you're looking for something a little bit more authentic, a little bit deeper, higher than maybe what you've perceived in the past. And that's ultimately a good thing, right? This is about, again, it's restructuring, knowing our value, knowing what we deserve. Having standards is a good thing, right? And it's about knowing what our boundaries are when it comes to things like dating. You're going to be most likely more perceptive of red flags when it comes to dating partners. And that's ultimately a very good thing, right? Because better to know earlier in a relationship than later. But really the big theme here is measured decisions, being okay with slow progress, and being able to see the bigger picture, what these planets are trying to say. But that's mostly what I had for you, Aries risings, and we will catch you on the next video. Take care. All right, Taurus and Taurus risings. So Saturn has been transiting your 12th house. The 12th house is a cadent house, and it is the house that is just above the first house, which is the house all about the self, sort of where you kind of enter the stage. The 12th house is kind of this liminal space, is how I like to sort of think about the 12th, where you have come and really you're closing out a chapter. And I might have said this in the general video, but there's quite often a focus on the Saturn return, wherever it is in your chart. But we also have to look at where Saturn is transiting, the house that is transiting is speaking to a subchapter in that cycle. And when it's in the 12th house, you've just closed out a more public kind of period, because Saturn had been, over the course of the past 6 years, had been transiting through your 9th, 10th, and 11th houses. These are all very public houses. And now it's in the 12th house. And wherever Saturn transits, it is restructuring. It is helping you kind of renovate that area to set you up for the next cycle. And this isn't going to apply to everybody, but oftentimes when Saturn gets to this place, and this can be for any sign, there's often a sense of, oh, I wish I would have done more, or I would have gone after XYZ, because Saturn was in those houses, which is the 10th house of career. Well, I should say 9th house of higher education, 10th house of career, 11th house of groups, sort of higher goals, like long-term goals, organizations, that kind of stuff, networking. Sometimes in the 12th, it's like, oh, I wish I would have gone back to school, or because now I feel like it's harder to do that, or I wish I would have gotten applied for XYZ job, but now it's not available. However that applies. But this is really a time to let go, release that, because we're not going to be able to change the past. It is what it is. We're here now in the present, and that's all we have control over. So if you find yourself clinging on to anything from the past, this is a time to release that. And this trine from Jupiter to Saturn will help you do that. This is a time where your energy is best served by releasing, clearing out old energies, integrating lessons. There's a lot of healing potential with these two planets. And I also should mention that there's a concept called planetary joys, and each one of the planets rejoices in a certain house. Well, Saturn actually rejoices in the 12th. The 12th house is a place of isolation. It's traditionally considered the house of self-undoing, the house of hidden enemies, all of that really fun, warm and cuddly stuff. But it's really more about releasing. And it's the closing of a cycle and the beginning of a new. If you're familiar with the tarot, for example, I consider the 12th house as like the world card, and the closing out of a story in a certain way. And soon Saturn will be entering your first house. That's the Fool card, and that's like a brand new hero's journey, so to speak. But for now, it's about really making sure that we've integrated any lessons that we've learned, especially I would say in the last, while transiting, Saturn has been in this quadrant of your chart, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So I would say this goes back to 2018, maybe 2019, up until now. And so Jupiter in the 4th is a period that really favors connection with your family, with your roots, with your home, however you define that, however you define family, right? It doesn't always have to be our biological family, but the people that you are closest to, the people that are the most important in your life. Now, with Jupiter in the 4th house and Saturn now having gone into this 12th house, these are both considered very quieter houses. And so you may just naturally find that you're a bit more introverted than usual. You're a bit more focused on family, or just being, you may just have a natural tendency to want to be at home more. You may feel a little bit depleted by this transit of Saturn in these houses. And that's completely normal. This is part of the life, the cycles of life that are reflected in these planets. This is also a great time for putting in down roots. So if you are looking to move, or you are looking to maybe purchase a home, or put down roots in some way, this is great energy for that. You're just not going to be as focused on external sorts of things. it doesn't mean that you're going to be a shut-in because we all have this happen a couple times in our life. But, you know, you just may be more focused on home life. And, maybe it's just like an increased interest in cooking or baking, home renovations, or really anything that you could do at home, any sort of DIY stuff. That that is all sort of indicated here. Art. And for those of you who have children, you may just feel more wanting to be focused on being at home more and spending more time with your children, especially if they're very small, if they're younger. All of that stuff is likely to be very therapeutic for you during this period. Now, on a heavier level, and this will also not apply to everybody, but there could be some themes coming up that involve ancestral issues, generational traumas. And if it does, trust that it is meant to, because Jupiter is a healing planet. It's healing energy. And when it's trining Saturn in the 12th, these are both very intuitive houses. These are both houses where trauma can be stored to some degree. And a lot of times, if part of the restructuring that is happening in the 12th house involves going back to our roots and finding the root cause of whatever needs to be cleared up here, because this is a house about it's a psychological house, and it speaks on a psychological level to the ways in which unhealed traumas can manifest in the conscious waking life as self-sabotage, as self-undoing. And this is, again, not going to apply to everybody, but for some, this definitely will be a theme where we are needing to clear out some sort of block. This is a great time for therapy of any kind, but anything that is going to help you get this area cleared out as much as you can. And again, this is over the course of a year, so this is not like a one and done sort of thing. Like I said earlier, there's going to be 3 trines between these 2 planets. Now, with Mars in the 3rd house, there could be a tendency for frustrations in communication, especially with it squaring Saturn in the 12th. And this could, manifest as conflicts that have to do with some unresolved issue having to do with the 12th house, where you might be feeling stuck in a way, and it's somehow affecting your ability to express yourself in the way that you want to. Sometimes we can come across the wrong way because the 3rd house is a house of communication, even if we don't intend to. So, and this could involve family members, but also siblings, friends, that sort of stuff. So just keep in mind, and sometimes this, conflicts can sometimes be inevitable, but if something does happen, if there's a disagreement, try to take your time and not just be overly reactive, because there's a very distinct possibility that it could be speaking to something deeper that really needs to be examined, that might be the heart of the issue, where whatever dispute is just superficial. It's masking something deeper that might be going on. But if there are disputes with Saturn trine Jupiter, it is meant to steer you into healing those deeper issues. So that's just something to keep in mind. But that's most of what I had for you, Taurus. So best of luck with these transits, and we will catch you on the next video. Gemini, and Gemini rising. So I love this setup for you guys for the most part. Saturn, so to start with Saturn has been transiting your 11th house. And this is, the house of our higher goals in life. It's also, it speaks to networking. It speaks to kind of our place in the collective in general, but it also, it's a lot about reaping the benefits of the work we have put in, whilst as Saturn has been trining the 9th house of higher education, higher learning, and then the 10th house of your career, your public persona, all of that. And so this is a time where, Saturn is seen as a planet of karma, of being demanding and all of that, but Saturn will acknowledge the work that we do if it is in line with our highest goals. And so this may be a period of time where there may be an increase in the demands of this house. Something about this is being restructured. So you may find that you need to adapt to increased demands as far as your social life, because this is a very social house. So there may need to be some restructuring, whether it be restructuring for an increase or restructuring for a downsize and putting up boundaries because you're committing to too much and it's not sustainable. There may be a feeling as though you should be doing more, but I would caution against getting too caught up with that. And this also speaks to the square from Mars, because this house is not just about income and values, but it's about kind of self-worth. Avoid the negative self-talk about that you're not either doing enough or feeling guilty about not going to that networking event, or, oh, I can't make that meeting for whatever group I'm a part of. Again, the emphasis here is on slowing down. Now, nevertheless, the trine from Jupiter in your third house, I really like to see this because this is like positive communication. This is like expanding local opportunities. But this is also the house of communication. So you might be getting some really good feedback about your efforts in this part of life, about any work that you're doing. Jupiter is really helping you to bolster your communication in certain ways. And the contacts that you have, the communication you have with your contacts are likely to be very positive during this time. And Jupiter in the third is great. It's a house of siblings, short distance travel, communication, which as a Gemini, I mean, really, I'm not 100% a fan of the sign house equivalent, but there's no denying that the third house and the sign of Gemini certainly share many similarities. But this could be, more expanded communication with your siblings, or maybe even like networking opportunities through a sibling, or through, this is also one of the houses of friendship, as is the 11th, where you're introduced to mutual friends that are helping you kind of expand your network in some way, or you're introduced to new ideas. And because this is the 11th house of higher ideals, it's more collectively focused. And so there's a restructuring in some regard of, again, this house, but it's going to have a distinct flavor of either manifesting through your local community, more expanded friend, networks through friends, or meeting new friends through networking. So this is all, as far as I'm concerned, very good things. And again, a lot of it is going to depend on sort of how Saturn's transit through Aquarius and Pisces went in particular. But I think that, as a general rule, we can expect to see some positive developments here. The one potential roadblock here is Mars in the second. Now, with Mars being in Cancer in the second, this is, the second is considered like a money house, but it can also speak to, like I said before, our values and our self-worth. And so, for example, one way I could see this playing out, and this is not going to be for everybody, but it's like going to some sort of social event and feeling like underdressed or something, or, oh, everyone's got, is driving Maseratis. I need to get like an expensive new suit for an interview, or I need to, like, I was invited to some very high sort of society event or something like that. That's just a possibility with these energies, but trust that regardless, with Jupiter in your third house, you're likely to make a good impression on people. So don't get too hung up on feeling inadequate in some way when it comes to your possessions. Uh, Again, that's going to be very specific, but it's just something to keep in mind. And it could, in a much broader sense, be a restructuring of values when it comes to those things, right? For many, it's like, oh, I used to equate success with having driving a certain type of car or having a certain type of purse or going to specific types of events. And that may all be under review. You may find that those sorts of things aren't as important, maybe, as you thought that they were, or maybe as they once were at some point. But I think the trick here is we don't want to be too identified with material things as a signifier of value. And of course, everybody's on their own path, and so I can't extrapolate my experience onto everybody else. But what I see here, and this is a theme of just Mars in the second in general, there can be a tendency, especially in the nurturing sign of Cancer, for their, in Mars in some way representing our appetite, is like a need to maybe retail therapy might be a potential issue during this time. There could just be like, I would just caution against like the keeping up with the Joneses mentality, because you don't need to. You won't need to do that. Again, Jupiter in your third house of communication, people are going to see you for who you are as a person, not by, and they're not going to be judged. And if somebody is going to be judging you by external, and I get that, first impressions are going to be based on those sorts of service level things, but I would just caution against going overboard with that, right? And if you feel a need to, getting to the bottom of why that might be the case. Because again, this is a period of restructuring, and part of what the 11th house represents is our long-term big goals. So part of that restructuring is going to be most likely renegotiating with yourself what is important. And there might be some tension there, but I love this. I think there could be a tendency to be too much in our head, maybe about what others, especially because I think it would be unwarranted. So I would just not get too caught up in how you think others perceive you, because the biggest roadblock to others perceiving you in a positive way is going to be an overemphasis on more superficial things. But overall, I see this as, and that is, again, that's not going to be for every Gemini rising. It's just something that could occur. And again, zooming out, trying to see if you're feeling some friction there. All right, what's the bigger takeaway message here? Is there restructuring that needs to be done in some way? But anyways, that's mostly what I had, and I wish you the best of luck, and we will catch you next time, Gemini. Take care. Cancer. So Cancer and Cancer risings. So this trine between Saturn and Jupiter is occurring in your 10th and 2nd houses. So these are the work houses. The 2nd, 6th, and 10th are all about work, because 2nd house is our earned income, 6th house is the work that we do on a daily basis, and the 10th house is our overall career, and they all flow into each other. Now, with Saturn here being at the very top of your chart, the 10th house is the most visible public part of the chart. As Saturn has been transiting this sector, you are now at a point where you are bearing the fruits of the efforts that you've been putting in over the past couple of years. And so this is really a time where career matters, and just, your public image in general is really shining. And that can sometimes be challenging because there could be, when Saturn is in the 10th house, there is a tendency for there to be extra demands at work. And you may be feeling some of that pressure to perform at a certain level. With Mars in your first house, most likely the energy is there to do that. But with this square, there's a couple potential pitfalls here. One of them is because the first house, and I was telling Aries this, the first house, I look at it as if it's like the helm of the ship. This is the front office, if you will. This is where executive decisions are made. And so with Mars here squaring Saturn, which also we've got the moon here right around when it gets exact. This is only going to be a couple of days, but because the moon is your chart ruler, it's worth pointing out. There may be, just right off the bat during this transit, a urge to make a quick decision about something career related. And I would caution against doing anything too hasty here. If you can take the time before you make any decisions, and again, this is going to be very specific how it plays out, but we want to avoid doing anything too hasty, because although you may feel like you can take more responsibilities on right now because Mars is in your first house, Mars is not going to be in the first house for much longer, and you want to avoid biting off more than you can chew here. So if you can exercise some degree of restraint here when it comes to career, and again, this is about listening to your intuition. And as a Cancer rising, your Cancer is a more intuitive sign. But Cancer also wants to take care of others, but don't do it at the expense of your own health, your own well-being, your own capacity to do it, right? Because that's not going to be in anybody's best interest. So that's, again, something to keep in mind. Jupiter in your second house is lovely. This is, for many of you, potentially bringing in expanded opportunities in the Department of Earned Income. So whether that is potentially like a new job or a new position within wherever you work, or just potential for additional responsibilities that could result in some sort of pay increase, you're going to want to say yes to it. And I think that, this is something that you likely will have the capacity to do, but you want to just be able to, you really want to do your homework, dot your I's and cross your T's before you commit to anything, because you don't want, I see this as potential recipe for burnout if we are not making sure we are fully aware of what we're committing to here. Now, this is also an area where you may be starting to find ways to kind of work smarter, not necessarily harder. This is great for restructuring some part of your career as you find ways to be more efficient. And yes, with Saturn, you've likely been feeling potentially some roadblocks or some obstacles that maybe you weren't expecting. But with Jupiter here in a trine, it's helping you clarify, okay, what's the most important thing that I want to accomplish right now? This is about getting our priorities in order, because this is a house of values, right? In general, not just money, but values in general. And so there's likely to be some reshuffling here, but it's ultimately to put you in a better position over the course of the rest of Saturn's transit through Aries, so that you can come out of this 10th house transit with, when Saturn gets into the 11th house in Taurus, you've really been able to get a more cohesive system in place. And this is going to be really souped up, I think, in a lot of ways. Again, the challenge here is going to be this tension with Saturn and Mars, but you don't want to end up getting, again, burned out by by taking on too much. And likely, once Mars gets into the second, there could be, because Jupiter and Mars are both going to have retrograde cycles in the second. So if there is something that comes up with increased opportunities for earning income or something like that, it might just be good to, again, take your time and not necessarily take the first opportunity that comes up, because there's likely going to be more things playing out when Mars and Jupiter are both in the second. So anyways, but overall though, this is something where people are starting to see your value perhaps in a way that they haven't before. As you've been putting in the work in this through the 8th, 9th, and 10th houses, you're most likely going to start to be recognized in a way that feels like, okay, I'm finally getting some sort of either recognition, or you're just getting, more opportunities. And again, it depends on the kind of work you do, but this is where the hard work is starting to pay off. But again, we want to keep the momentum going, but in a sustainable way that isn't going to burn us out later, especially in the next couple of years as Jupiter gets into Taurus and then Gemini in your 12th house. So that's mostly what I had for you, Cancer. I'm wishing you the best as we head into the fall, and we will catch you on the next video. All right, Leo and Leo risings. So for Leo and Leo risings, this trine is taking place between Saturn, which has been transiting your 9th house of higher education, higher learning, spirituality, religion, and your 1st house, which represents yourself. The helm of the ship, so to speak, is the 1st house. As Saturn has been transiting Aries in your 9th house, there's been a focus on increasing your knowledge in some way, whether it be literally higher education or just higher learning in general, spirituality, maybe all of the above, or none of the above, because the 9th house is just about expanding our horizons. Travel, for example, is also, especially foreign long distance travel, is the house, is a 9th house matter. Now, Saturn is often associated with a restriction in travel or facing like roadblocks. And I don't think that that's really always the case unless you've got some major squares or oppositions that are being triggered by this transit. But really, it's where this part of our life is being restructured, renovated in a way that when Saturn leaves it, is going to be in better condition. Saturn, if we work with Saturn intentionally, Saturn always leaves the house in better condition than where you found it, for the most part. That may not always be the case, but part of what Saturn does is he restructures, and it's really based on the things that are important to us. Now, with Mars here in the 12th, this could signal some potential obstacles initially with this trine. And this is really speaking to the need to be balanced, because this can, with Mars in the 12th house can speak to our subconscious fears, insecurities, things that are kind of under the surface. And so we may not be consciously aware of them. And that's why it's very tricky, especially when you have Mars in this 12th house, because sometimes it can be like, why am I feeling so anxious? Why am I feeling so irritated, irritable? Why am I feeling restless? And you may not be able to pinpoint lucidly why, but if meditation can be really good in bringing that to the surface, because being able to draw those things up and and being able to pinpoint the source of any anxiety that we're feeling or any sort of restless irritation, anything like that is going to be really key. Now, on one hand, what this could manifest is a feeling of inadequacy in some way, like, oh, I don't know enough, or I need more, I need to learn more, I need to do more training, or you're feeling somehow like you don't have enough knowledge, you don't have enough, you're not progressing in something related to the ninth house in a way is that you, in the way that you feel as though you should be, and that there's something missing. Or on the flip side, this could manifest as like perhaps an overconfidence in what you know, to the extent that you may think that you know everything about something, but it's then something happens where it turns out you don't. So, and it could be as likely that neither of those things manifest, but we want to just be careful about either going too far in one direction if we are feeling, because both of those things would stem from some sort of insecurity that is being felt about something related to the ninth house. Generally, it's something about knowledge, right? Because this is a house of higher knowledge, higher education. So this is just something to be mindful of. But with Jupiter in your first, you know, this is really expanding your horizons in a lot of way. And Jupiter is associated with the ninth house. There's no denying that in many ways the ninth house is very Jupiterian, because a lot of the things that Jupiter represents, which ultimately boils down to broadening our horizons, is also manifested through the ninth house. And with Saturn here, Saturn is willing to play nice with Jupiter and be like, okay, how can we restructure this? How can we set the correct set a sustainable and lasting framework, that facilitates in a sustainable way ongoing education, ongoing learning, because we're never done learning. And the biggest red flag is when you stop being curious. When you think you've known it, you know everything. The universe has a way of showing you just how much you don't know. And I am not pontificating here. I mean, trust me when I say that statement comes to some extent from personal experience. But really, as you get older, it is like you realize just how much you don't know. And now, and then sometimes you may be like, I don't know how much more I want to know, but that's kind of a separate issue. But either way, there is likely to be tremendous opportunities here. So if there's something that you've wanted to do, whether it be I want to, go back to school, or even just like take classes in XYZ, or I want to get some sort of certification, some specialized training in something. I want to take an astrology class. I want to learn how to, something spiritual. This is most likely going to present you with opportunities to do that. So I would definitely say don't let any hidden anxieties from the 12th stop you. If you're feeling like there's something that is blocking you from going after what it is that you want to go after when it comes to ninth house things, then slow down, try to dissect it, try to get to the bottom of it and see, okay, well, what are the actual roadblocks, and are they really insurmountable? Because most likely, Jupiter here is wanting to present you with the opportunity, especially because this is the ninth house. And that's, again, what Jupiter is about. So a lot of it is just about, addressing any sorts of hidden things. The best way to approach this is just to be open-minded, not just of the opportunities that come our way, but to also be open-minded about learning more, about expanding more, about, because this is a house of evolution, right? This is where we can really grow on a soul level as we manifest the things that we want, So all in all, though, this is This is, I think, going to be a good series of trines between Jupiter and Saturn in these two houses. And the focus is on staying grounded and and just being curious and open-minded about whatever comes your way, especially in the next year. But anyway, Leo, that's what I had for you, and we will catch you on the next video. Okay, Virgo and Virgo rising. I've been looking forward to this one because you guys have got a lot of very fascinating things going on all at once. So, to start out, so you've just completed a South Node transit through your first house, and that lasted about a year and a half. And during that time, you have been, in one way or another, releasing old versions of the South, how you relate to yourself in some way. Because the South Node is about really shedding one's skin and emerging renewed in some way that is more resonant with the journey that you find yourself on today. Meanwhile, you've had Saturn ingressing into, or Saturn has been transiting your eighth house. And wherever transiting Saturn is in the chart, it is in some way restructuring that part of your life. And so, what is the eighth house? Well, conventionally it's referred to as the house of death, but death in the sense, generally speaking, of death and rebirth, transformation, all of that. It also deals with other people's money, other people's assets, but it also can speak on to deeper levels. And one thing that is very interesting about the eighth house is that it is the second derived house from the seventh house. And the seventh house is all about partnerships, significant relationships. It often is understood to refer to marriages and partnerships, romantic relationships, but really the seventh applies to any significant relationship that you have in your life, which for most of us is going to be more than one. It's not just going to be our spouse or our partner. And certainly if we don't have one, it is going to refer to our good friends, business relationships, any relationship where there is a meaningful mutual investment. And the second derived house from the seventh speaks also to the values, the assets, the income, and the resources of those people in our life. Over the course of August, by the time this trine with Jupiter becomes exact, Venus has been going through your second house, and Venus is the domicile ruler of Libra. The second house, Libra, and Venus all speak to values in some way. And so, with the combination of the South Node having left your first house and Venus going through your second house, there is a clarity that you are feeling about your own values. You have a sense of clarity in a way that maybe you haven't felt before. And sometimes when we have gone through a period of metamorphosis, which is indicated by these transits, there is a sense that of, in some ways, outgrowing the old values in a way that may, and again, this will not be for everybody, you may be finding that what is important to you may not be what the same things that were important to you even a year ago, and that you may somehow find yourself at odds with the people that you are close to in your life. And again, the seventh house could be family, close friends, and obviously partnerships. And again, this is something that won't necessarily feel new because Saturn has been in your eighth house for the better part of 2026. So you'll know you'll know at this point if this has been a theme for you. But this is something that can happen, and it's absolutely, this is just part of your soul's evolution. And sometimes we just simply outgrow old relationships, or we, Virgo as a mutable sign is very solutions focused and is very much has the resources to try to work things out, to come to some sort of common ground with people. And that's something that is unique to, I think, mutable signs, but specifically Gemini and Virgo, because it's Mercury ruled, and Mercury is about, to some extent, compromise, negotiation, and all of that. But sometimes you're just not going to see eye to eye, and that is just part of life. With Mars in your 11th, and also the South Node having now retrogressed into Aquarius, when I see these two aspects, I'm thinking that on some level you're thinking a little bit bigger. There's a sense because the North Node represents kind of our appetite, our drive, it's a period of increased energy. And the sixth house is in many ways, it has a lot of, it shares many of the Virgoan themes of service to others. And you are, kicking this North Node transit through the sixth house off with a, again, much clearer sense of sort of what kind of impact you want to make. And if you've been thinking smaller in terms of what service to others means, you're probably thinking in much bigger terms, or you will be over the next year and a half. And of course, that is going to imply maybe a interest in different groups, different causes, different things that we want to be a part of. And that's indicated with Mars now in your 11th house, because the 11th house represents groups, associations, organizations, social causes, are long term, right? So like lifetime level goals, hopes, and dreams that we set for ourselves. And so with Mars now squaring Saturn, there again may be some tension, right? Between sort of where you are at this point in your life in light of these major endings and beginnings, really, in a lot of ways. You've come out of this changed in some way. And where you are now could now be at odds with, on a value level, again, with some of those people that you may have been more aligned with in the past. And if this is the case, just know this is completely normal. This is, it's always sad when we've outgrown certain relationships, but one of my favorite sayings is, you've got like 3 types of friends: friends for a reason, friends for a season, and friends for life. And, unfortunately, that last category of friends for life is normally, for most of us, a pretty small group of people. And sometimes, it's okay to say we had a good run. And again, this doesn't have to be in terms of relationships. It can be any sort of, or romantic relationship. It doesn't have to be in terms of just romantic relationships. It's any sort of significant relationships. Now, that's not the only way that this could manifest. This could also be, especially for those who are in committed relationships, a period of time in which circumstances, if they have not already arisen. Well, before I get into that, with Jupiter trining Saturn here, if there are any significant relationships that are meant to end, it is going to feel on a soul level that it is the right thing to do. So that's going to be how you know, because when Jupiter is in your 12th house, it provides a level of heightened intuition, because the 12th house is one of the psychic houses. And when Jupiter, which is a very spiritual planet, is in this house, it is that voice from deep within becomes magnified, and it is going to resonate at a frequency that is going to be much stronger than perhaps it normally is. And that's going to, of course, depend on your other placements and just how intuitive you feel you are as a baseline. But that will be your indicator here, because with the South Node, and also with the South Node going through your 12th house, there's a letting go of old subconscious attachments, subconscious fears, subconscious ways in which maybe we have like self sabotaged, or we have being like a perfectionist or being like critical. But a lot of times it manifests internally, where Virgo can be really quite hard on themselves. And so with the South Node here, I think it's actually is helping you release some of those old ways of thinking. And again, a lot of this is very subconscious, but it's going to be released nevertheless. A lot of times this could play out in terms of our significant relationships. And there is one more eclipse in Pisces at the end of August, which I think will most likely, because it is occurring so close to when this trine is becoming exact, is likely going to further facilitate some sort of growth in these areas. And this is not going to be the case for everybody. So I don't want you to think, oh, I need to, pick 3 people that you're closest with and like one of them's got to go, because this does not play out the same way for everyone. Other potential ways this could manifest are, if you are in a committed relationship, circumstances could arise. And again, this may not be anything that is new, where there is some sort of restriction on assets of your spouse, or maybe circumstances arise where your spouse isn't able to work, or isn't able to work as much, or there's maybe a pay cut, because Saturn is restriction in the house of the income and assets of the partner. This isn't a great time to try to get any sort of loan, unfortunately. And so this is a period where you may be shouldering more responsibility than you've had to in the past. This could also be taking care of an elderly family member, where you're really having to shoulder a lot more than you've had to. But again, with the North Node now in your 6th house of service to others, there is incoming energy in this department. So, if you felt as though, and this is relatively recent, this just happened in August. So, or I want to say at the very end of July. So, this is an area, this represents an area of increase. So this could be increased responsibilities in some way. If that is the case with Jupiter here, it's providing healing energies in the 12th house, which is all about, the psychological stuff. So it's providing a level of resilience and an ability to sort of rise to the occasion, not only because it's Jupiter, but because the 12th house for Virgo risings is in Leo, and it's about being brave, and it's about tackling those problems head on. And so there is support for overcoming adversity here. And again, this is going to be not the case for everybody, but if that is the case, there's tension here because this is also a social house. So you maybe feeling like your bigger hopes and dreams are somehow being derailed by the Saturnian responsibilities that are popping up in the 8th house. But just know that this is just temporary. This is just a speed bump, if that's the case. And that those hopes and dreams and goals are still going to be waiting for you once you are able to overcome whatever obstacles have come up. But beyond that, I think that, and I think all of this is really kind of part of the bigger story of Pluto going through your 6th house, which is transforming the way in which you relate to serving others, right? And that's what Virgo is about. Like, I know so many Virgos that are in the medical field, like veterinary fields, and they, it is one of those things that I just admire about that sign is not just the willingness, but the capacity to serve others in a really meaningful way. You just want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and that, the North Node is just a point of increase. And overdoing it can lead to, in some cases, doing too much can lead to physical exhaustion, physical issues. So just make sure that you're balanced and that you are taking care of yourself, not just physically, but also mentally, which should be, you're supported in that endeavor with Jupiter in your 12th house, where it's going to be for like another year. So, but yeah, I see this as being very, very good. And if there are roadblocks here, you have the resources to face that head on. So I'm wishing you all the best of luck, and we will catch you on the next video. Okay, Libra and Libra rising. So this trine is happening while Saturn is transiting a very important part of your chart. This is a really important part of Saturn's cycle through your entire chart because it is now in the angular 7th house. And for Libras in particular, this is a period of very significant restructuring in terms of your personal relationships. Now, as I was telling Virgo in their reading, the 7th house is not just about marriages and romantic relationships. It is about the significant one-on-one meaningful relationships we have with anyone. This is the 7th house governs any sort of important, significant relationship where there has been ongoing mutual investment. And this applies equally to business partnerships, right? Because as with like a good friend or a business partner, there's some sense of an ongoing mutual investment in some way, right? So whether or not you are single or married, this is going to be restructuring the way you relate to the people that are important to you in a major way. Now, values are a critical part of this equation. Why? Well, as a Libra rising, Venus is your chart ruler, and Venus is the planet that represents values. And even if you don't have Venus in Libra, with Venus transiting your first house now, values are still being brought into focus. And again, whether you have Venus in Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, or Sagittarius, values are still going to be important for you in general, and they're being brought into particular focus right now since Venus has been going through your first house for most of August, and she will also be retrograding. As she goes into Scorpio, she's going to be doing a retrograde cycle back into Libra. So this is just the beginning. She's going to be entering, I want to say actually, she has just entered her pre-retrograde shadow. Libra, I think, is often a misunderstood sign. It's like, oh, Libras are balanced. And that's not necessarily, I would say, true. I think it's more accurate to say Libras are always striving to find balance internally and externally, both within themselves and in their relationship to others, but it's not going to be inherently balanced. There is always going to be an attempt to balance, which may or may not happen. And, when we think of Libra, we think of negotiation, diplomacy. Libra gets, I think, unfairly characterized as people-pleasing or somehow disingenuous. But I think that reflects some misunderstanding of just the fundamental nature of Libra, which is trying to find balance. And when we see Saturn in the 7th house, this is a wonderful time for restructuring the ways in which you find balance and harmony with others. At this point, with Saturn now being in your 7th, you are redefining what is important to you, and really in many ways your own identity. And this is a time where you may be seeing the ways in which you need to set boundaries in significant in your significant relationships, because these planets are asking you to. They're screaming at you to, as a matter of fact. And for the record, it doesn't matter if you're 20 years old or you're 60 years old. There's always continued growth. There's always room for restructuring, for refining things in some way. Now, with Mars in the 10th house, the very obvious sort of tension here is between career and relationships. So this is where, if you feel like you are sacrificing too much of your career part of life in order to serve a relationship, this is a time for renegotiation with that relationship, where you are going to feel the need to assert yourself a bit more. And if you've been overgiving in some way, well, this is a time where you may need to be renegotiating with, in terms of relationships in some way. With Jupiter in your 11th, this is a fantastic house for Jupiter to be in. This is a house of our hopes and dreams, our life goals, collective causes that are important to us, our the groups that we identify with, the groups that we're members of, organizations, etc. And for many, with Jupiter in this house, it is helping you see what is really important to you. And if what is important to you is somehow at odds with the people in your life that you consider important, that's going to be magnified here, not just with Jupiter, but also with Mars. And so this is a time where, again, like one way this could play out is like our friend group is all my partner's friends. I want to go out and find my own friends, or like I want to take this promotion, or I want to go after this career, some aspect of my career, but my partner doesn't approve of that. This is a time where you're likely feeling more empowered to assert your own sovereignty. And this is part of a restructuring that is going on in your 7th house. Because by the time Saturn leaves here, you'll likely have a much more developed sense of what you will and will not put up with, so to speak. And this is all part of the sort of lifelong journey for Libras and Libra risings of finding that level of balance. But you're going to come out of this, especially with the multiple trines from Jupiter, having a renewed sense of what truly is important. And will it be attracting people that reflect what is important to you, what is truly important, and not just in a way where you feel like you have to give too much of yourself in order to make somebody else happy, because that's out of balance, right? And ultimately a rebalancing will occur in some way or another. Now, on a more mundane level, there is potential for troubles in business partnerships. Not a great time for signing like long-term contractual things with Saturn here. Divorce is a possibility, but this is not something, with Saturn now having been in Aries for some while now. If that's a possibility, I think there certainly have been indicators of that so far, but that's not going to be the case for most people. But for most people, I will say for most Libra risings, there is a distinct need to advocate for yourself in ways that you may not feel comfortable with, or you haven't done it to that level before. But there's a much less of a tolerance for bullshit, right? And this is where self-advocacy becomes really crucial. Libras are great at negotiating, but you just have to know when to walk away, right? when to fold. Sometimes you just got to fold. Sometimes not every negotiation ends up in success, but it doesn't mean that you can't try. And a lot of times it is successful, but there needs to be some sort of renegotiation going on here. And one other thing I forgot to mention with Jupiter in the 11th, this is for those who do have a good social support system, that is going to, because the 11th is also about friendships as well. And so for those who do have a support system, they're going to be backing you in this, right? And that's not and that doesn't mean, I would caution, one of the things that could happen, just because this is Jupiter and Leo, which Leo can be dramatic, right? And especially when Mars gets into Leo, there's potential for drama here in a big way. So this is like a very good opportunity to address issues early on before they become a real problem. And again, that's going to be specific just to some Libra risings, friends getting involved, and this is your opportunity to work out any problems that you see, because again, Mars and Jupiter are both going to be retrograding in the 11th. So this is a very good time to get things squared away in this department. So you've got the month of September, and I wish you the best of luck, and we will catch you on the next video. Okay, Scorpio and Scorpio rising. So these trines are going to be taking place between Saturn in your 6th house and Jupiter in your 10th house. So these are two really, important houses for you, Scorpio. These are two out of the three what we call money houses, right? Because the second house is about your earned income, assets, all that sort of stuff. The 6th house is the daily work, right? It's the daily grind. It's the work that you put in on a daily basis in support of your overall career. Now, Saturn has been in your 6th house for most of 2026. And before that, it was in Pisces. And during his transit through Pisces, which would have been 2024, 2025, the 5th house was about creativity, risk taking, romance, pleasure, all that kind of stuff. So for many of you, this might, because Saturn is a period of restructuring. For many of you, you may have decided to take a big risk or a big gamble on something like a new job opportunity, a shift in career directions. And if that's the case, you're now finding yourself in the 6th house, where that is sort of being integrated into your daily life. Like whatever that move that you made was while Saturn was in the 5th is now being incorporated into the 6th house. And the 6th house is all about our daily routines, our daily habits. And this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road, where you are putting the work in furtherance of whatever those goals, those higher goals are that you've set for yourself. Now, when Saturn is in this sign, it can often manifest as a feeling as though we are under a microscope in some way, whether that be, if you work for, a company and you've got a boss, you may, if you haven't felt already, a feeling of being sort of under a microscope in some way, you may be feeling that to some extent. If it's a business venture, you may just feel some sort of pressure to deliver at a certain caliber that feels quite demanding. But this is something that Scorpio is quite good at as a sign. And with Saturn here, you were able to rise to the occasion and meet those demands. I don't see that as actually being the major obstacle here, because the 6th house is also about our physical health. And when Saturn is in this house, remember, it is a malefic planet, and it is a planet that is associated sometimes with health issues, particularly chronic health issues. And ones that take a long time to develop, but can also take a long time to heal. And so the big red flag I see here with looking again just at Saturn alone in this house is a tendency to want to overdo things. And I would exercise caution here because even though you may be feeling pressure to perform in some way, there is likely going to be a natural tendency to want to overdo it. And you may not realize it, but just to give you a really personal story, I had my sixth house is in Capricorn. And when Saturn was transiting my sixth house, I had decided that I was going to run a half marathon. It was a goal that I had wanted to do because I never really liked running, but I just like I wanted to do something that was hard. And so I trained and trained and trained, and I actually made a lot of progress. And I had a very specific time that I wanted to run it in, and I was like really hitting my goals. I was like doing a lot of training, but I was ignoring the things you need to do to take care of your body and ignoring just how demanding it was physically on me. And I wasn't stretching adequately. I wasn't giving myself enough rest days. And so I would say about a week and a half before the half marathon, I was on a training run and I ended up getting shooting pain up my right leg that was like debilitating. And I had been doing a there and back route and I had to walk 6 miles back to my car. I was on this like river trail because it hurt so much to run. As it turns out, I had developed IT band syndrome, which is a really painful inflammation of the tendon of like basically tendonitis. And I had to go to sit a physical therapy for 6 weeks. Now, that was when my Saturn was exactly conjunct my Mars, and the transiting South Node was also there. So is Pluto. So there's a lot else going on. But the big lesson that I got from that was you need to slow down sometimes, take care of yourself, because if you don't, there's going to be consequences because that's what Saturn represents. So I would just caution not overdoing it or feeling, any sense of inadequacy. Make sure that if you have a superior, most likely it's not going to be as unreasonable. If you feel like you're taking on too much, a conversation with a boss, for example, is likely to go well because Jupiter is a benefic planet. Jupiter wants to say yes. Jupiter wants to be amenable to things. So that's the big thing I want to stress here is not doing too much and paying attention really to your physical health. And it doesn't matter if you're younger or older. It's just very important to, because again, this is such a physical house, and this is a house of illnesses, of physical illnesses and injuries. But beyond that, this is really an incredible opportunity here to fine tune aspects of your daily life. There's a period of restructuring that is going on here that is, by the time Saturn leaves Aries and enters Taurus, this will be a well-oiled machine for you if you work with the energies intentionally. And when I talked about working smarter, not harder, this is a perfect example of that. This is a time with Jupiter being in your 10th house, it's bringing a lot of career opportunities. And this is where you can really build some really incredible cohesion, where you are finding ways to be more efficient and again, working smarter, not harder. And that is the goal here, is to be able to get to a point where you don't have to worry about burnout, about stress, about the physical toll that things can take if you can find ways to optimize sort of your time, your energy, your efforts on a daily basis. Now, the other thing I was going to, or that I wanted to discuss was, with Jupiter in your 10th, it's likely bringing a lot of opportunities for expansion. So again, if for example you own a business, you may be seeing a lot of expansion at this time, and with Saturn here, there could just be some growing pains as you adapt to more business coming in, right? It could be a potential for a promotion or something like that. But if that's the case, I would again really make sure you know what you're signing up for, because Jupiter is going to can throw all sorts of stuff our way. It's not necessarily going to, that could be beneficial in certain aspects, but we want to be discerning. We don't want to just take on more if it's something that we we think might be taking a toll in sixth house matter. So that's just something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be going after those opportunities if and when they come in, but just make sure that you understand exactly what you're signing up for, which Scorpio gets to the bottom of things. So I'm not as worried for a sign like Scorpio to not ask the questions they need to ask to make an informed decision, we'll just say. And with this with the square from Mars, which is traditionally Mars is a ruler of Scorpio. In the ninth house, this is a house of higher learning, higher education. So a part of it is like, well, could I maybe get more training? Is there something in terms of like education? And I'm not talking about, oh, I need to go back and get an advanced degree. It's more like, oh, I wonder if maybe I can learn more about whatever it is that I'm doing, especially if it's something new, or even if it's not new. Is there a way that perhaps additional training, additional education could help me work more efficiently in some way? And again, that's not going to be for everybody, but I can just see that as playing out. Beyond that, you may be feeling, because Mars here is squaring Saturn, and this is also about travel, long distance foreign travels, expanding your horizons. There's sort of an appetite for many to want to do that, but you may be feeling inhibited because of the demands of your daily life here due to work or just in general. So again, this is just temporary, but there is a possibility that there's tension there. But overall, I do see here, by the time these trines are done, you will have considerably souped up this area of your life, and really, I think it's going to be very beneficial in career, public recognition, business, all of that. So wishing you the best, Scorpio, and we will catch you on the next video. All right, Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising. So for most of 2026, Saturn has been in your fifth house. And this, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, is not a fun place to have Saturn transiting. And if it makes you feel better, I have it in my natal chart. So I'm stuck with it for life, which happens to be Sagittarius. My fifth house is in Sagittarius, but um, it's the fifth house is the house of fun. It's the house of pleasure, creativity, romance. It's the house of taking risks, thrill seeking, recreation. And Saturn can quite often feel like a stick in the mud when he's here. And many of you may just not have been feeling as social as perhaps you normally are. And the things that once gave you joy, because this is this is the house of good fortune, and it is fundamentally about the things that make us happy. And there's a heaviness here, a sense that the things that used to really make us happy and get us going are just not doing it for us in the same way. But if you're feeling this way, just know that it's most likely because you have outgrown some aspects of your life. And the reason why I say that is because you have Jupiter, who is your chart ruler, in the ninth house. So not only is Jupiter your chart ruler, but the ninth house in many ways overlaps with what Sagittarius is also about: expanding horizons. It's about growth. It's about higher learning. It's about spirituality. It's about those distant horizons. And when I see these two planets in these two signs, it's like there is a sense of you've outgrown something, and on a fundamental level, and you may not even be consciously aware of it at this point, or maybe you are, but regardless, there's a need to, there's most likely on some level an appetite for something more. And that is perfectly normal. We all go through periods. Whenever Saturn is in this house, it is a period where we are restructuring, we are redefining what it is that makes us happy. This is something where if you're single and you're dating could pose challenges. You may just find yourself really bored. You may just, not be quite as satisfied with dating process prospects, but that's not always the case. A lot of times, because Saturn and actually Jupiter really represent older people. It could be like you meet somebody who's like older than the range in which you would ordinarily date, or it could also be that you are like the older person, and you're dating somebody who's a little bit younger than what you might normally date. Or it could be, and this is going to be for single people. It's like maybe I'm going to hold off dating for now because I'm thinking about moving abroad, or going moving to a different part of the country to get a higher education. Or you're just not focused. You may just not be as focused on it, and you're being pulled in a somewhat different direction. And for those of you who are married or in relationships, this could be where things have perhaps gotten into a place where it's not as exciting perhaps as it once was. And again, this is just completely normal. It doesn't mean that you've outgrown your spouse, so to speak, because this is just sort of the ways in which we do experience excitement and joy and pleasure and all of that. And so there's, again, it's just part of the restructuring that is going on. And so Jupiter here is the key to navigating this is through Jupiter, not just because it's in the ninth house and trining Saturn, but because it's your chart ruler. So this is a period, again, of redefining what it is that makes me happy. And because the ninth house is the third house away from the seventh, this is a perfect time for discussions about your needs. And if something isn't working, those conversations are more likely to go well because Jupiter is in the third house from the seventh. So again, this is a period in which those conversations could be fruitful as you navigate and renegotiate sort of those lighter aspects of life, so to speak. But because we also have Mars, at least for this first trine, in the eighth house, when I see it arranged with Saturn in such a way, and also with Jupiter in the ninth, there's an appetite for transformation and a willingness to transform. And I see here a real sense of if there's things that just don't do it for you anymore, like that's okay. And it's time to kind of build something new. And that's again, that's just part of life, really. This isn't a great time for major investments, but it doesn't mean that any investment is not going to pay off. Remember what Saturn demands. Aries, because you have your sixth house in Aries, Aries is a risk taker. And Saturn is not a risk taker. It doesn't mean that you can't take risk, but it needs to be a calculated risk. So make sure that you've done your due diligence, because if you put in the time and effort into a venture, into researching, into making sure that it's feasible, then Saturn is not going to give you much trouble. It's only when we are taking risks in a way that Saturn considers to be reckless, where we might find out that it was not the best move. So, but overall, I think that these are the major themes to watch out for. But with this trine from Jupiter, you're able to see what it is that you want. If you haven't yet, you certainly will be. Yeah, so that's really what I had for you, Sagittarius, and I wish you the best of luck, and we will catch you on the next video. All right, Capricorn. So Capricorn rising. So this is a really significant, I think these trines are going to be really significant for Capricorn risings. Not only because Saturn is your chart ruler, but Saturn is at the very root, the very base of your chart right now. And wherever Saturn is transiting, whatever house he's transiting through, he is providing a restructuring, a rebuilding, a renovating in some way of the house. Saturn always wants to leave the house that when he enters a new house, he wants to leave it in better condition than he left it. And Capricorns are ruled by Saturn. And so I think that even though Saturn is debilitated in Aries, and of course, depending on your individual chart, that you're able to work with Saturnian energies in a way that is easier than for other signs. With Saturn in the fourth in general, this can often speak to a period of increased responsibility when it comes to domestic affairs. And with Jupiter in the eighth house, so this is the second house away from the seventh. So this speaks to the income, assets, etc. of, for example, your partner, marital or relationship partner. So one way this conventionally could play out is your partner got a new job that pays more, but as a result, there's increased responsibilities that keeps them away from home, and you have to shoulder a little bit more of the burden at home. Again, that's just one very specific example. It's not going to play out like that for everybody, even for those who are married. It could sometimes point to areas in the home that physically need to be renovated, or you may be doing some home improvement in some way, because this does speak to the physical home as well. It could just be reorganizing, rearranging things, restructuring it in some way. And this could also be, increased responsibilities when it comes to your parents. If you have aging parents, there may be some pressure here to shoulder some additional responsibilities. But whatever's going on right now is super important, because it is going to restructure this part of your life. And this is a very important part. I mean, this is literally speaks to our home, our foundation, our roots. And Saturn wants Saturn leaves Aries and enters Taurus, he will not be back here for another 30 years. So again, this is a period in which we can really, I mean, really develop and improve and provide like that very strong, lasting structure, which is what Capricorn is fundamentally about. Now, with Jupiter in the eighth, this is great for example, if you are looking for a house, I wouldn't normally say with Saturn in the fourth that is like necessarily the best time, but with Jupiter in the eighth, and if with Jupiter going through these trines, the eighth house is about other people's resources, which include loans, for example, and mortgages, right? Um, a loan is literally somebody else's money that you're borrowing and paying back. So Jupiter as a benefic planet wants to say yes. So I actually see it as being good for that, and not just for mortgage, but also for like home renovations, or it doesn't even really have to be home related. Any sort of loan is good for that. Now, um, in very specific contexts, this, Jupiter in the eighth also speaks to inheritances. It could be having, especially trine Saturn, this conventionally can deal with like the affairs relating to the passing of a parent, like probate, wills, that kind of stuff. If that's the case, things should go smoothly because, again, we have Jupiter in this house. And just to go back to relationships, partnerships, with Mars in the seventh, there could be a potential for conflict. But, when it comes to responsibilities, especially for cohabitating partners, in terms of who's doing what, or is there, is somebody taking on too much? And doesn't have to just be romantic partners. It could be, it includes anybody really that you have a close relationship with. And so it isn't limited to spouses and partners, but there may be some renegotiation that is going on. But ultimately, any transformation and adjustments that are made are likely to work out. And that's because we have Jupiter in the house of transformation. Now, there's also a deeper level here, which is not going to be for everybody, but this is a house of death and rebirth in a spiritual sense as well. It isn't just literal death. And the fourth house is our roots, but it's also like our ancestors, like going back generations. And so this is also a period of maybe gaining insight or like really healing perhaps generational issues, to where you may find a sense of closure or a sense of peace with deeply rooted issues, whether with your parents or even going back further. You may come to some sort of understanding, and there's a greater sense of compassion with Jupiter in the eighth house. There's a capacity to be more compassionate here, which can provide a lot of healing on a personal level. So I do see that as being quite good. And again, we're going to be getting 3 of these. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for building up this, this very foundational part of your chart. So Capricorn, that's what I had for you, and I wish you the best of luck, and we will catch you on the next video. All right, Aquarius rising. So this trine between Saturn and Jupiter are taking place in your 3rd and 7th houses. I'm going to start with Jupiter for you guys. So with Jupiter now having transited in the first half of Leo, it's going to have a retrograde cycle, and it's going to be here in this part of your chart for until next July. So it's a long period, and the 7th house is all about our significant relationships. marriages, romantic partnerships, good friends, any significant relationship with mutual investment is a seventh house matter. Business partners, long-term relational contracts are also part of this house. Now, with the South Node also entering here, there's a period of shedding old ways of showing up in relationships, while also having opportunities to add some depth and expansion in those same relationships. Now, my experience with Aquarius and Aquarius risings, just in a general sense, is that they tend overall to move a little bit more slowly in relationships. So, whereas with some other signs, I might be concerned about jumping too quickly into something new. I'm not as concerned about that with you guys. But if if you find yourself holding back a little bit too much, Jupiter here indicates that you're getting the green light, that it is safe to move forward in something deeper. Again, this is not going to apply for everybody, but if you are sort of in like the early stages of dating, this is like the green light that, yeah, it's safe to move forward in some way. Now, and again, this is going to be very specific, but any legal disputes that arise during this time are likely to go well. However, Jupiter is not a detail-oriented planet. So you want to make sure that you're being very careful about the details of documentation, stuff like that, because there's a tendency to overlook things because Jupiter is more concerned about the big picture. And sometimes especially in the legal world, the devil's in the details. So just something to keep in mind. And that's not going to apply for everybody, but if it does, just something to be mindful of. And I'm also not as worried because with Saturn in the third house, which also, it's a house of communication, and Saturn is a planet that is more about the details. So it's a nice counterbalance, especially with the trine. Saturn is making sure that Jupiter is not overlooking things. And this also, by the way, goes for potential like red flags in a relationship, or especially like a newer relationship. Saturn is kind of making sure that Jupiter isn't being too, wanting to say yes too quickly. So we have a little bit of a check and balance here. And more broadly, with Saturn having been transiting your third house, this is a restructuring in the way you communicate. A restructuring in, this also applies to friendships, sibling relationships, extended family. So there's some restructuring here. Saturn's also about boundaries. And so there's likely to be some restructuring of boundaries and restructuring of your communication in general. And I actually think these are two really great houses for these two planets to be in, because when you think about it, cultivating depth in any sort of significant relationship is going to require at some point good communication. And Saturn is helping you refine that and, again, restructure it. So this is a time where you may have experiences where, there may be some sort of disagreement. And I think the best way to take advantage of this energy is to look at it as an opportunity, that this is an indication that these planets are helping improve your ability to communicate and receive communication in a restructured way. And for those who are single, whether or not you looking to date, or you're, for those, even if you aren't interested in a romantic partner at this time, this is really speaking to just how you communicate in general, and sort of what, sort of like just how you show up in general. And What are you willing to compromise on? What are you not willing to compromise on when it comes to boundaries, really with anybody? You know, you may encounter some difficulties with those who are accustomed to how you used to be, right? Or they have you sort of pigeonholed into a certain category, and they may find that they're quite wrong about some aspect of you. Because with Saturn here in communication, there's not as much tolerance for bullshit. With Aquarius, there isn't usually, but to the extent that there might have been before, there's certainly not in this period of time. But if people can't handle who you are now, then that's usually a sign that maybe your paths have diverged, and you're just operating on a different wavelength, you know? And that's it's just part of life. We all grow, and we all are on different paths that sometimes they intersect, and sometimes they diverge, and that's just part of our journey. I think I was telling Virgo this. There's one of my favorite sayings is there's three types of people in your life: friends for a season, friends for a reason, friends for a season, and friends for life. And that you can apply that to any category of people. But sometimes old superficial friendships may not necessarily survive this transit. And if they don't, then those people are most likely just no longer resonant with you. And again, it is about shedding to some extent the old to make room for the new. And with the North Node going through your first house, you have an incoming energy that is helping you to redefine who is Aquarius and how you are showing up in the world. So I would just exercise caution to not fall in the trap of thinking that there is something wrong with you. Because, of course, with Saturn in the third, there's always going to be a possibility of conflicts. The trick, though, is if the conflicts reveal a difference in values, then that's a little bit more of a significant issue, right? If it's just a silly argument, okay, that doesn't mean you need to end a friendship or a relationship. But if it's something where you were just not aligned with somebody else in some way, that's a good indication that maybe it's time to move on. That's mostly what I had for you, Aquarius. And I wish you guys the best of luck, and we will catch you on the next video. Take care. All right, Pisces. So Pisces and Pisces rising. So Saturn is in your second house, and it is trining Jupiter in your sixth house. Now, the second house is all about our values. It also speaks to earned income, assets, self-worth, all of that stuff. And so with Saturn being in Aries in this house, it is restructuring that part of your life. Now, historically, Saturn transits to the second house were considered as indicating a reduction in income in some way. That isn't always how it plays out. And it's not going to be the case for everybody. But I think that's just kind of a basic way of looking at it. It's very straightforward, but the second house is about a lot more than that. Really, material things are the outward expression of our inner values. So there may be some changes in that regard, but the restructuring on a very fundamental level is about your values and what is important to you and how you value yourself. Now, the sixth house with Jupiter transiting is about our daily routines, habits, work, coworkers, physical health. And Jupiter is a benefic planet. It's about abundance, expansion, goodwill, all of that stuff. So, for those of you who have been dealing with health issues, Jupiter in the sixth is good for that. It can provide healing energies. But for those who aren't struggling with that, I think a lot of what this represents is better relationships with coworkers, for example, more recognition for the work that you do on a daily basis. And I actually think that with Jupiter in the sixth, this is sort of counterbalancing the restrictions here with Saturn in the second, because here this could also point to potential opportunities for even income growth. However, because we do have Saturn in the second, if there is opportunities, it's likely something that you are going to have to work quite a bit for. So it's not going to necessarily feel easy. But I don't think it's really this doom and gloom thing of like, oh, you're not going to have income. And again, this is going to be, if that is a case for you, you likely will have felt it because Saturn has been in Aries now for most of 2026. So this trine from Jupiter could be kind of a lifeline for those who have experienced that. But what's nice though is that Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces, and so as a Pisces rising, traditionally speaking, Jupiter is your chart ruler. Jupiter also rules your 10th whole sign house of your career. And so here it's like there's actually a lot of opportunities for career advancement. There may be a period within the course of the next year that you feel like you're having to put in a lot of work, but any work that you do put in is likely to pay off in the career sector. With Mars in your fifth, this is temporary, but it could manifest as some sort of frustration that you're not able to do the things that you want to do to have fun, either because you're working too much or there's some sort of limitation in that regard. Or maybe it's like a sense of maybe feeling like you're missing out on something because of work obligations. And again, this is just going to be temporary. I think the real big picture here, Pisces, is that part of the individuation process, right? Part of the process of discovering who we are as individuals is getting to a point where the things that we do on a daily basis really and truly reflect our values. And I'm not just talking about money, right? That's part of the equation, but there's values speak to more than just our income and our money. It's our spiritual values, our emotional values, our moral values. So for some of you, you may be finding that the work that you're doing right now is simply not rewarding. It's not fulfilling. And maybe there's something else that you'd rather be doing, but you've been holding back, maybe because it doesn't offer the same sort of income opportunities or for whatever reason. And this is a period in which you are reevaluating your priorities to some extent. And you may find that you may want to go somehow in a different path. And you may find that it may not actually be as limiting as you think, because I do think that when we are aligned with our purpose, right, doors open. It's when we aren't, we can go a long time. Trust me, and I'm speaking from experience. You can go a long time out of alignment with what your soul really needs on a deep fundamental level without, and it can appear okay on the surface, but there's going to be a increasing sense of dissatisfaction if you veer too far on away from what it is that you truly authentically want for yourself. And that's why Saturn going through this house is so important, because it is helping you refine, restructure, and renovate that part of your life. And you may not find, or you may find that you don't have to sacrifice as much as you thought you would, because Jupiter is in the sixth house to be able to do what you want to do. So, and again, it's only take this if it resonates with you, but if you are feeling that, this is a time where you may want to explore those other opportunities to see if it's even, just to see if it's feasible, because circumstances may have changed since Jupiter has been in your sixth house, and Jupiter and Saturn are both going to be in these two houses for another year, right? And we'll be getting two more trines. So again, this is something that is likely to be, does not require any sense of urgency. It's just a period where, again, you have the opportunity to perhaps take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and see, am I getting what I need, right? Out of what I am spending my time doing. And I think that's the bigger message here. But I think that's most of what I had for you, Pisces and Pisces rising. But I thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you on the next video. Take care.